Hey everybody, and welcome to the Infoporter Webcast, where we will talk about what SAP Infoporter is and how it fits into your implementation approach. When we talk about Infoporter, we really have to start by talking about some of the terms that are out there around it. There's a lot of nomenclature and there's been some changes throughout the years. Infoporter has been around for a while and it has gone through some different names during that time. At its core, Infoporter leverages the Business Integration Builder framework. So you'll see that mentioned a lot. And the way that Infoporter came to be as a name is really from a marketing perspective. The term Infoporter was primarily used when talking about migration, but it's also leveraged on the replication side. And on both those sides, it really uses the business integration framework. If you're not entirely familiar with the differences between the terms migration and replication, migration refers to when you take your SAP HCM data and move it up to the cloud to Employee Central. Replication refers to the action of taking that data and then replicating it back into the SAP HCM system. And when we go through the several deployment scenarios that are out there, we'll talk about kind of the difference of where that would happen and when that would not happen to have both migration and replication. So let's dive in what Infoporter really is. It is a purpose-built SAP tool for migrating data specifically from SAP HCM to SuccessFactors Employee Central. It is the recommended technology to do that because it is purpose-built to handle that specific migration and replication and has specific features built in to handle the data between those two systems. It maps and converts the data for usage in SuccessFactors Employee Central and has the ability to export that data both as comma-separated value files or directly replicated into SuccessFactors Employee Central. At the end of the day, Infoporter has a lot of benefits. One of the major one is that it does not require a separate license. It's delivered with the prepackaged integrations as an ABAP add-on free of charge. There's no extra documents to sign. There's just steps to actually install it so you can start using it. Once it's installed and it's ready for use, you actually have a lot of built-in logic for HR processes. And that includes, but it really isn't limited to hired, retired, and transferred employees, international transfers, global assignment, and concurrent employee that are terminated. Through a lot of this built-in logic and a lot of the features that it comes with, it reduces a lot of the effort that goes along with migrating your data. Now, instead of having to do a lot of custom code to handle and manipulate your data, you can do this through configuration within Infoporter. It also comes with a lot of sample content to accelerate your implementation, and it has a lot of built-in support for custom data types or custom info types, as they're called. When you are moving data, you have a couple of options for extracting that data. And it comes down to two. There is the comma-separated files that you will use to extract the data, and then there is the web services. This applies both to organizational data and employee data. On the CSV side, you really would only use this for smaller amounts of data and use that for one-time migration tools, and it will handle foundational data. We'll dive a little bit in the next one into why that is once we get to the use cases. On the web services side, we have a lot more flexibility when handling larger amounts of data and where you're frequently loading and uploading data. It also allows to do delta loads, which means you're shaking data that is only changed instead of taking a full data dump that you put into the system. And again, it also applies to foundational data. We have some recommendations on when to use CSV versus web services. At the end of the day, web services will be often the better approach because of the flexibility we discussed earlier. And as we go through the deployment scenarios and as we talk about the use cases, it will become a lot more clear why that is a recommended approach. When you're talking about CSV, you're talking a lot of manually generated and manually loaded files that can only be used for migration and can't leverage any middleware to do it. So when you move over to the web services, you have a lot of automated and automatically loaded abilities that can be used both for migration and replication. Plus, you'll be a lot more agile because now you can immediately focus on error resolution. This really is an overview of some of the common deployment scenarios. Infoporter can and should be leveraged with any of these scenarios. Our approach, based on our experience, is to start with EC, and within that core hybrid, deployment is the most common when you are moving your core HR to the cloud. The reason for that is that when you're doing payroll and HR together, you might stretch your team too thin. So depending on your complexity, it is advised to focus on moving the core HR first and then focus on payroll and other modules like time and benefits and all the other ones that are out there. So let's talk through some use cases. This is just to give you an idea of where you would use which Infoporter option. The first one is where you have SuccessFactors talent modules and you're now implementing Employee Central and you won't be using any middleware. There's 5,500 employees, you're in one country and you're only looking at migrating data. In that case, a good approach is to use Infoporter CSV. Spreadsheets are easy to manage with 5,500 employees, and they're easy to extract. Plus, you're not replicating the data back, so there is no need to reuse that information again. The second use case is where that is the case. So now you have the exact same scenario, but you do want to replicate data back. To do that, you want to avoid a lot of duplicate work. So we recommend using web services because you can take the configuration that's used for migration and all the errors you've resolved there and apply that configuration back to the replication to make sure that that portion goes quickly as well. So it really is an extreme effort reduction through doing that. The third use case is where the customer is implementing Employee Central. So here we're talking more complex, more high volume, 50,000 employees, 15 countries, and both migration and replication. Again, web services will be the better, more agile approach because you can, especially with 50,000 employees in 15 countries, there will be a lot of records that need to be transferred. So being able to do delta loads, being able to see those errors appear and be able to handle them and make sure that you go through each of them efficiently and agile is going to be a big advantage to your project implementation timeline. We'd like to share some of the challenges and lessons that we have learned throughout all of this. We have migrated over 1 million employees so far using Infoporter, and part of this is where this experience and some of these lessons learned come from. So the first one is that in a lot of the traditional approach, when you're handling data migration from HCM to EC, you're talking about creating, filling, and loading files and CSV templates. This means that that extraction of data is done through either table downloads or custom ABAP programming. Like we mentioned before in reducing the effort, we're not talking about custom code here. We're talking about doing configuration and doing the common mappings that Infoporter provides to you to give you a head start on starting to test that migration and replication. This reduces a lot of the data quality issues that custom code usually brings with it. On top of that, a lot of times the responsibility for providing the content for the data migration is handed to the customer without there being a preamble to that to say this is what's about to happen. So that means usually the experience is not there in-house to be able to handle getting and gathering that content and performing these migrations. So in order to mitigate that, we really say look at Infoporter, look at it to utilize it for your standard product migration, and go on from there. It will definitely give you a large head start. On that note, throughout your implementation timeline, you will see that there will be adjustments that happen to both the migration and replication logic. And if they become frequent, the effort that goes along with that is often underestimated how this will impact your data quality and project timeline. So if you're looking at using a lot of custom code to do that, it means that every time you publish a replication logic change, you will have to adapt your custom code to be able to do that. So this will create a lot of overhead in having to do development ongoing with every change that happens. Infoporter doesn't have that problem once you leverage it because it is done all through configuration. So what are the key takeaways? Really, we want to give you the idea that you really reduce the effort for the migration and replication by using a standard tool, a tool that is purpose-built for this, that's available to you for free, that has features built in to specifically handle this migration and replication. Therefore, it will give you a head start on the migration and replication and will significantly reduce the risk on your project. This will also give you instant feedback on what the errors are and ways to quickly resolve it and retest it when you're leveraging web services. Now, like I mentioned, we have migrated more than 1 million employees using Infoporter worldwide. Part of this experience that we've gained was due to the fact that we helped develop the original Infoporter tool in collaboration with the SAP Product team. So this put us in a really unique position to look for ways to enhance what Infoporter already does. First of all, the leading practice configuration. This really is meant to give you an additional head start because we want to focus on configuring the EC system based on the leading practices. And by doing that first, you get to a working Infoporter configuration in just a matter of days. Top of that, we have Infoporter analytics for both. On top of that, we have the migration and replication analytics. This has helped to really monitor and capture the errors that will come out of Infoporter once you run it and groups them and provides additional context. So that means when you know that context, you can start prioritizing, assigning, and resolving these errors quickly, i.e. triage the errors. Then we have the dynamic data validation. As we've mentioned, there are continuous configuration changes that are happening. Some of this will be picked up by Infoporter, but a lot of it you will have to maintain manually. The dynamic data validation will help you to continuously adjust that automatically and increase the quality of your data. And then lastly, the replication data compare. If you do have replication in scope on your project, the replication data compare tool will help you to compare the data in EC with the data in SAP HCM without actually having to replicate and override the data in SAP HCM. At the end of the day, the end result for that is that this greatly extends your window for testing. Now, if you need more background and information on where to start using Infoporter, check out these resources. On the right, you'll see a screenshot of the dedicated page that we have up for Infoporter, which will also include a copy of this webinar that you can rewatch and send to your colleagues at any time in the future. On the left, there is a sample of some of the videos and documentations that you can find on SAP's own help pages. There's a lot of documentation there, so we recommend looking at this documentation, reading through it, seeing what applies to you, and going from there. As I mentioned, there are different terms, so be aware of that. Feel free to download this webinar after this and go to the first slide and kind of figure out where those different terms are. The data migration tool, Infoporter, or business integration builder. There's a lot of terms out there. Okay, awesome. I'd like to thank everybody for taking part of this webinar and hope to see you in the future.